We are official in the final stretch of the 2024 US presidential election, and let me tell you, this race is tighter than a drum. In less than 6 weeks, America will decide who the next president will be. The stakes couldn't be higher, and today we are diving into the latest polls that show Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump locked on a fierce battle across key battleground states. Trust me, this is shaping up to be one of the closest elections in recent history, and it's anyone's game at this point. So stick with me as we break down the numbers, the trends, and what it all means for election day. So let's start with the big picture. According to these fresh poll numbers, Kamala Harris is ahead of Trump in nearly all the battleground states. But don't get too comfortable because these leads are a resulting margin, like within the margin of error thing. In fact, it's so tight at every point, every voter, every rally matters more than ever before. Here's the breakdown. In Arizona, Michigan, and Wisconsin, Harris is leading by 3 percentage points. Yeah, just 3 points. Now, if you're familiar with political polling, you know what it means. It's basically a statistical tie. It's so close as any slight change in momentum could flip these states either way. In Nevada, Harris holds a stronger lead with a 7-point margin. And that's good news for the Harris campaign because Nevada has been leaning Democratic in recent cycles, and it looks like she's maintaining that edge. However, the story in states like North Carolina and Pennsylvania is much closer. In North Carolina, Harris is only 2 points ahead, and in Pennsylvania, she's leading by 5 points. All of these states are incredibly important, and the margins are so slim that it's impossible to predict who will take them on election day. Now, let's talk about Georgia, one of the most fascinating battlegrounds of this election. According to the Bloomberg polls, Harris and Trump are tied here. That's right, tied. But this isn't the only data we have. A Fox News survey of likely voters in Georgia actually shows Harris ahead by 3 percentage points. That's good news, of course, for Harris, but hold on. This is still within the margin of error, so it's not a comfortable lead by any means. Georgia has been a political battleground since it flipped blue in 2020, and both parties are treating it like the crown jewel of this election. We've seen massive campaign spending in Georgia, voter engagement efforts, and rallies in every corner of the state. From Atlanta to Savannah, the energy is electric. Republicans want Georgia back, while the Democrats are fighting tooth and nail to keep it in their column. In fact, Trump is so focused on Georgia that he's already held multiple rallies there in the past few weeks. And we know Harris has been making appearances too. Georgia is going to be one of those states where election night might keep us all on the edge of our seats. The bottom line, do not underestimate Georgia. It could very well be the deciding factor in this election. So what's the deal with these slim margins? Why are they so important? Well, let me take you back to 2016 and 2020. In both of those elections, states like Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania were won by resulting margins, sometimes by less than 1% of the votes, and these states ultimately decided the election. Remember 2016 when Trump overperformed in those key Rust Belt states and flipped them red? Most of the polls had Clinton winning by a few points, but when the votes were counted, Trump just had enough to eke out a win, and that's the danger Harris faces today. Even with the small leads in states like Michigan and Wisconsin, the real challenge is making sure her voters actually turn out and show up at the polls. These close races mean that even a slight shift in voter enthusiasm or turnout can swing an entire state and ultimately the entire election. That's why the Harris campaign is working hard to register new voters, particularly in urban areas, and is focusing on issues like healthcare, the economy, climate change to mobilize their base. Now, let's take a look at Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is one of those states that both campaigns are treating as a must-win. For Harris, Pennsylvania represents a critical part of victory, and she's currently ahead by 5 points. And this is a big but. Like Michigan and Wisconsin, it's all within the margin of error. In 2020, Biden narrowly won Pennsylvania by about 1%, flipping it back to the Democrats after Trump carried it in 2016. The Harris campaign is banking on high turnout in urban areas like Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, but they are also working to win over suburban voters and rural communities where Trump is still incredibly popular. The battle for Pennsylvania is going to come down to turnout. If Harris can mobilize her voters in the cities and make inroads on suburban voters, she's likely to win the state. But if Trump base in the rural areas turns out in force like they did in 2016, Pennsylvania could once again flip red. Here's the reality. Pennsylvania might be the most important state in this election. It's often said that as Pennsylvania goes, so goes the nation. and I think that's truer than ever this year. We can't talk about this election without mentioning the hidden Trump voter. Back in 2016, one of the reasons Trump surprised so many was that his supporters didn't always show up in the polls. They were underrepresented in surveys, and many analysts believe the same thing could happen this year. Polling isn't a perfect science, and while pollsters have tried to adjust their methods to account for this, there's still a chance that some of Trump's base is flying under the radar. These are voters who may not participate in traditional polling or might be reluctant to share their political opinions, but they'll definitely show up on election day. Trump has always done well with non-college educated white voters, and we are seeing that again in this election. His rallies are drawing huge crowds, and his supporters remain as energized as ever. So while the polls may show Harris with a slight lead, the hidden Trump voter could be the white card that tips the scales in his favor. Now, let's talk about Kamala Harris' strengths, because she's no pushover in this race. Harris is pulling strong support from two key demographics, women and young voters, young black voters, of course. In fact, these groups could be the deciding factor in whether or not she pulls off a win in November. According to recent polls, Harris has a double-digit lead over Trump among women, and this isn't surprising. Her campaign has focused heavily on issues like reproductive rights.
And we, who believe in reproductive freedom, will stop Donald Trump's extreme abortion bans because we trust women to make decisions about their own body and not have their government tell them what to do. And when Congress passes a law to restore reproductive freedoms as President of the United States, I will sign it into law.
Healthcare and gender equality, issues that matter to a lot of women, particularly in suburban areas among women of color. We also can't ignore the youth vote, especially among the black populace. Harris is doing extremely well with voters under 30 who are energized by her stances on climate change, social justice, and student debt relief. This generation of voters is fired up about progressive issues, and they see Harris as a candidate who best represents their values. Now, here's the big challenge for Harris. Young voters have a history of not turning out as strongly as older voters. If Harris can motivate these young voters to not only support her in polls, but also get to the voting booths, it could give her a crucial edge in key states. Now, on the other side, let's talk about Trump's key strengths in this race, primarily his hold on rural America and his economic messaging. Despite everything, Trump's economic policies still resonate with a lot of voters, especially in rural areas among working-class Americans. Trump has consistently pitched himself as a businessman who knows how to create jobs and grow the economy. Even though the economic landscape has shifted since he left office, many of his supporters still believe that Trump is the better choice when it comes to handling issues like inflation, job creation, and energy policy. Then, there's Trump's appeal to rural voters. In 2016 and 2020, Trump won these areas by huge margins, and that's likely to be the case again in 2024. These are voters who feel left behind by the political establishment, and Trump has successfully positioned himself as their champion, someone who is not afraid to fight for what they believe in. That is why we keep saying, don't count Trump out. Even if the polls show him trailing in certain battleground states, his supporters are incredibly loyal and energized. And remember, many of them don't always show up in the polls, but they will show up on election day. Now, we can't forget about the white cards in this election. Third-party candidates and voter turnout. Third-party candidates like those from the Libertarian or Green Party may not have a realistic chance of winning the presidency, but they can still drain votes from the major party candidates. In a race as tight as this one, even a few percentage points going to a third-party candidate could have a huge impact. For example, in 2016, some analysts argued that third-party candidates helped Trump by pulling votes away from Hillary Clinton in critical states like Wisconsin and Michigan. Could we see the same thing happen this year? It's possible. Then there's also the issue of voter turnout. This is the biggest factor in close races like these. If one side can get their base to the polls in higher numbers than the other, it could be the game changer in this election. Both campaigns know this, and that's why we are seeing a huge push for early voting, absentee ballots, and voter registration drive across the country. So where does this leave us? With less than 6 weeks to go in this election, on a knife's edge, Kamala Harris is leading in several battleground states, but the margins are way too close for comfort. Meanwhile, Trump's base remains strong, especially in rural areas and among voters who are looking for economic recovery. And we can't forget the wild card, third-party candidates and voter turnout, which could completely change the game in these final weeks. The reality is, anything can happen. We've seen elections flip at the last minute before, and with this much at stake, both campaigns are going all out to secure those final votes. It's going to be an exciting and unpredictable few weeks ahead. So what do you think? Do these new polls change your predictions for these elections? Will Kamala Harris hold her lead, or is Trump going to pull off another shocker like in 2016? Drop your thoughts in the comments and let's get this conversation started. Don't forget, of course, to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Hit that notification bell so you stay up to date with all our election coverage, and give this video a thumbs up if you found it helpful. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.